where do you want to see Daniel Jones make the biggest jump and improvement in 2020? And, next week at some point, I did a little Daniel Jones study. It'll go up on the website. The big thing for me is quicker decisions and getting rid of the ball faster. If you take a look at Jones last year when he got into the most trouble, I won't go into all the details because it's a lot of numbers and it's going to make people's heads spin. But when he held the ball longer, bad things happened. When he tried to do too much, holding the ball longer, 3rd and longs, things like that, bad things tended to happen. And I think the quicker he gets rid of the ball, there'll be fewer sacks, fewer pressure, fewer fumbles, and there'll be fewer interceptions because he's making quicker decisions. And I think that can naturally happen with a young quarterback as he sees more defenses in his second year and as he gets more and more experience. So for me, that's where I'm looking for Jones to make the biggest jump in this year. It's kind of just making quicker and better decisions. I can get into more of that as you guys give your answers. Lance, let's go you second this time.
Well, I think decision-making to me as a whole subject, a whole label, is the place to go. I mean, you were more specific, John, in terms of your classification about getting rid of the football perhaps a little bit quicker. Ball security certainly falls under that umbrella. I know that's stating the obvious, but let's face it. If you cough up the ball 18 times, you lose 11 of them. That goes right into turnover differential. And no matter what you say about Daniel Jones's performance last year, and there were a lot of positives, the completion percentage, the touchdown to interception ratio, it's hard to have a fair conversation about Daniel Jones without not bringing up the ball security, the fumbles, on top of the 12 interceptions. So 33 giveaways, 23 of which Daniel Jones accounted for. And yes, I know people are going to say, well, there was the throw in the Lions game that Devon Kennard returned for a touchdown, and it was more of Saquon Barkley not covering up the ball. Yes, I mean, we could sit here and overanalyze every single fumble. The bottom line is, as a whole, the number was too high, and you're killing your offense. So I would say it's hard for me to go in any other direction other than good decision-making / ball security has to be the area that he makes the most significant jump from 2019 to 20.
I think it's a good choice. Paul?
Well, for me, it's going to be the tempo and the processing, which is really the same type of thing that you're talking about. I think the ball security is going to come once he learns how to process things quicker, because once everything speeds up for him, whether it's the decision-making or the physical movements that he does in the pocket,
Paul,
the anticipation.
I think the game has to slow down for him, which will make his play speed up. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and that's what they call it, the game slowing down, but what it really is you're anticipating a lot faster. Your intuition's a lot faster,
right.
And that's why they say games slow down.
And I think that lends to the point I made too, right? That'll help him get rid of the ball quicker.
Right. Now, I did a full video analysis of every one of his 18 fumbles last year, okay? And I went through this during a BBK probably about a month or two ago. And basically, by doing the video analysis on each one of his fumbles, I categorized every single fumble and exactly what it is that went wrong on every fumble. So, for example, I can tell you that 3 of his 18 fumbles were when he was a runner, okay? Those are going to happen because he's a quarterback. He's not a running back. He's not a tight end. He's not a wide receiver. So when a quarterback is running with the ball and he's running around doing something with it, trying to gain yardage or just trying to run to the sideline, those fumbles are going to happen. That's not about processing necessarily.
100%.
Okay? But then when you talk about the other things, okay, now we're talking about throwing from the pocket, blindside strip, okay? I have here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of his fumbles were done on blindside strips, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 of his fumbles were blindside strips as he was actually throwing the ball.
That's correct.
Now, if he is able to process and even get that ball out, I don't know, 0.8 seconds earlier,
Paul,
maybe those strips don't happen.
Yeah, you cut them down.
Try 0.2 seconds. I mean,
Okay.
we're not
Yeah,
talking
right?
even 0.8. 0.8's a lot. You're talking 0.2, 0.3. I mean, you're talking a tenth of a second.
No question. Now, to break down the fumbles even further, there was one fumble of the 18 that was a backwards pass in Detroit.
Yep.
So let's not kill him on that one because that's a crazy fluky play.
And there were 2 fumbled snaps, by the way, too.
Yes, there's a fumbled snap, a drop shotgun snap against the Jets. Okay.
One against the Eagles was the same. They didn't one against the Eagles late in the year.
Eagles was muff shotgun snap.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. And then it was punched out of his hand.
Yep.
Okay? So when you start to take the 18 fumbles and break down the video analysis of each one of the fumbles, you realize that it wasn't as damning as a lot of people want to make it out to be. There certainly are a percentage of these that I used to go up to Coach Shula, Mike Shula, who was obviously the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach last year, and I'd say, Mike, look, I know you don't like any turnovers and you don't like fumbles or picks. I get it, from the quarterback's position in particular. But there are turnovers that are bad. There's such a thing as a bad fumble, and then there's an understandable fumble. And he goes, no, we always say turnovers are bad. All turnovers are bad. And I said, yeah, but Mike, I got to disagree with you on that, because there have to be reasons for those particular fumbles or those particular picks. And if there is logic behind it and the other team just made a play, well, you know what they say? They get paid too. Sometimes they just made a play.
Paul, I'll finish up. I'm sorry.
Well, and then that's we talk about it all the time with interceptions, right? We talk about how can you blame a quarterback for a pick when a receiver ran the wrong route and the ball gets intercepted because it looks like he threw it right to the defender. Or when a receiver tips a ball up and it gets intercepted and we say, well, it doesn't show up in the stats, but that really wasn't a pick on the quarterback. That was the receiver's fault. So we're willing to quantify the quality of the turnover, if you will, for interceptions. But nobody ever quantifies the quality of the turnover on a quarterback's fumble. And that's what I attempted to do when I did this video analysis of every one of his fumbles, probably about, it was right after the season. And I made up a whole chart with all this stuff on it. And it's very specific. And when I did that, I said, you know what? Daniel Jones doesn't have that far to go to fix this, because a bunch of his fumbles were non-quality fumbles.
Yeah,
Charlie doesn't want to hear that, though.
Yeah, I got a couple of things to add to that. Well, I did the same thing. I watched every one of his turnovers last year, Paul. And
yeah.
I think you're right. And that's why from the end of the season, you guys know this, I've always said the fumbles aren't a huge worry for me. I'm more worried about the interceptions. So first thing on the fumbles, I think you're right nearly entirely, Paul. And just to give you another analysis of it, Pro Football Focus tracks what they call turnover-worthy plays, right? Plays that they say, and for those plays, for a quarterback, they might take away an interception if, to your point, it's like a tip pass and it's not their fault, or they'll take away a fumble if they don't think it's the quarterback's fault, but they'll add, say, like a dropped interception because it should have been a pick, but the guy just drops it, right? So that's how they qualify their turnover-worthy plays. And I talked about this with one of their data guys that's going to be on the John Huddle next week, George Shakruri, and they had Jones for 31 turnover-worthy plays last year. It was the third most in the league. Jameis Winston had more, and Kyle Allen had more. Those are the only two players with more. Here's the interesting part. Only 10 of those 31 plays were fumbles. They had 8 of his fumbles that they classified not his fault. Because either the rush got there too quick, or it was, while he's releasing it, Chandler Jones on one play, right? He reaches in and kind of tips the ball away. So not just you, Paul. Other people have kind of come to that same type of conclusion. And of those 10, by the way, 3 were those running plays you were talking about. It was the one against Dallas earlier in the year, one against Dallas later in the year, and one against Washington later in the year. All 3 plays were on third downs, by the way, where Jones decided, okay, well,
got to do something.
Well, yeah, but sometimes sliding and surviving is better than trying to do something and fumbling.
Or take the hit, yeah.
Right. So I think that's something he can improve on, too. 2 of those were the fumble snaps, the fumbled snap and the muff snap you talked about. So only 4 were plays where it really had bad ball security in the pocket, right? So to your point, I don't think his fumbling is as big of a problem as people make it out to be. Now, here's the other part of it, though. That means he had 21 plays that were either interceptions or balls that should have been intercepted but dropped. I thought one of the ones they qualified in that against the Vikings was a little bit iffy. So I'll put it at 20, let's say. Okay. And I do think, to your point, Paul, that's something that Jones will have to improve on. And I think there's a couple ways he can do it. One, there are 2 ways to classify aggression. Right? One is how much you throw down the field. I think Jones can maybe throw deeper a little bit more often. The other way you classify aggression is how often you throw into contested areas. And I thought Jones was far too aggressive last year, trying to squeeze the ball into small areas where there wasn't a ton of space to get the ball in. Now, the result of that is a lot of spectacular throws. You're like, oh my goodness, what a throw, small area, great pass. But if that turns into an 8-yard gain, is that worth the risk of that play turning into an interception? Probably not, right? So this is kind of the point that I like to make with Jones. If you look at Jones's highlight tape and just as good plays, you think this guy can be an all-pro quarterback. But then if you go look at his 30 worst plays of the year, you're going to say, boy, this guy can't play. So he needs to just find a better equilibrium and a balance, I think, between his aggression and trying to do too much to saying, okay, we'll punt here. That's okay.
Okay, and that's fair, John. And I think to your point there, I also want to add another component to this, and it goes back to something we just said a little while ago about how do you blame the quality of the interceptions. The Giants don't have guys who really are very good at getting 50-50 balls, okay? They've got a rather short wide receiving core. They don't have any Plexico Burruses on this team. Okay, I know you're going to say that Ingram is a tall tight end. I get that.
No, you're right, though. They don't. You're right.
But they don't, okay? Eli was such a beneficiary of being able to throw that ball to the sideline and knowing that Toomer was going to make a play. He knew that anywhere he threw the ball up in the air, the Plex was going to go up and get it because he was going to reach outside the box. And as Dan Reeves taught me many years ago, making plays above the X's and the O's. That's when I first heard that statement, and Dan was 1,000% correct. You need guys who will do that. The Giants don't have, and even Odell Beckham Jr., who made a bunch of athletic, spectacular catches, was not consistently good at making 50-50 balls when he had to fight defensive backs to make a play. And that's something that would help Daniel Jones's numbers dramatically. And I add one other thing to this fumble situation. Last year, he had three fumbles where the ball came out of his right hand just as he was trying to tuck it away because he was a split second too late. And that goes into that other category, John, where we talked about throwing motion, where the ball's getting knocked out as he's throwing it. Same situation. Ball was getting knocked out of his hand as he was trying to tuck. If you're a split second faster on either the tuck or the throw, those fumbles don't happen. And those are the ones that I think he's got to be able to clean up.
Well, that goes back to fundamentals. I mean, all that's tied into decision-making, too. I'm not saying that that's not a valid reason, but it still goes back to Paul, the quarterback, and what he's doing in that moment, and whether or not it's second nature, even if the timing is a little bit off, how you adjust. I mean, that's a big part of decision-making.
Oh, for
the
sure.
other thing that's in fairness to this conversation about analyzing interceptions, and I'll go back to that year. I forget which season it was, guys. Eli had a very high number of interceptions. At least 6 or 7 of them were deflections. So I remember we always had conversations about, okay, yeah, Eli had a high interception rate, but in fairness, 6 or 7 of them was a result of, goes off a wide receiver's fingertip into the hands of another player and so forth. You have to tell the story of each turnover. In fairness, though, I think you also need to tell the story of every touchdown pass, guys, and we don't do that very often.
Well, Lance, by the way, let me throw in there, too, none of Jones's interceptions came on tip balls last year.
Correct.
Just FYI, not one. So
I'm not bringing that up to bring down his total.
I know that.
True.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But the reason why I'm bringing up deflections is, let's go to the touchdowns, though, guys. The one to Golden Tate against the Patriots, if you remember, that was a ricochet pass, and then Golden Tate was in the right place at the right time to make the catch. Now, could that have been a turnover waiting to happen? Absolutely. My point is, wide receivers also help the quarterback in throws that weren't ideal but turn out good.
They don't help them enough. They don't. They flat out don't. The Giants do not have a wide receiving core that helps out this quarterback as much as they need to.
Well, they don't have the tall guy that you're talking about. But hold on. You're going to say Golden Tate doesn't deserve credit for helping Daniel Jones against the Patriots on that play?
One play.
Okay.
How many games did the guy play during the course of the season? How many times did he make a ball as opposed to make a catch as opposed to how many times he didn't fight for one or didn't make a good catch that could have been made?
Now, in fairness, I don't think those interceptions came on contested balls like that, though, on 50-50 balls. Paul.
I agree with you.
I
agree with that,
they
John.
Didn't.
I agree with that. I'm not suggesting that the interception numbers should be different. What I'm saying is that on the whole, Daniel Jones, and this was quite also the case with Eli Manning during the last couple of years, he did not get the benefit of having a receiving core that consistently, now anybody can do it once every month. I'm talking about consistently, almost on a once-a-week basis, we saw a guy like Toomer or a guy like Burris help out Eli making a play that maybe should not have been made. And when you have that as a quarterback, things take on a whole new look.
Well, they do, and that's why I was going to also get to another play, for example, against the Eagles, the second game in Philadelphia, the first game, at Philadelphia, where Daniel Jones' pass to Darius Slayton all of a sudden turns into a home run touchdown. Now, I'm not saying there was anything wrong with the throw, but that's the player helping out his quarterback by forcing a missed tackle and taking it to the house. So my point is, there are things over the course of a season, if we look at most quarterbacks, there's going to be plus minus in the touchdown interception department, where you can argue there are guys that didn't help out their quarterback, but then there's a number of plays across the board. I'm not just talking about Golden Tate, Paul. I'm talking about the group as a whole that made plays that more often than not would not have resulted in a touchdown, but did because of the extra effort play by the wide receiver or the tight end.
How about this? Let me put it this way, and maybe I can get both you guys to agree to this point. I do think that Jones probably has to be a little bit more accurate than other quarterbacks because the receivers don't have as large of a frame as maybe some other receiving corps do.
They have a smaller box, John.
Right. No,
it's that simple.
And I think that's fair. And I think when you look at some of his accuracy numbers, they do some of these advanced accuracy numbers, I do think those get hurt by the fact that these guys maybe have a little bit, and Lance doesn't like us taking shots at short guys, and I know that's the whole root of this whole thing.
No, not at all.
But
that's not the root.
Yeah, I know, I'm joking. But Daniel Jones, I think does have to be a little bit more precise with some of his passes because he doesn't have those guys, besides Ingram again, with those gigantic frames. I think that's fair.
That puts him back in the same category, to be perfectly frank with you, as Jeff Hostetler and Phil Simms years ago, which is when I became very sensitive to this issue because Phil was playing with guys like Bobby Johnson and Lionel Manuel, Stacy Robinson. These guys were not any of these guys were amongst the taller half of receivers in the NFL. Bavaro was his number one target and his only 1,000-yard wide receiver because he happened to be a guy who had some size and had a box. And Phil could throw it across the middle because he knew Bavaro had an opportunity to get it. He didn't have the luxury of receivers who had the wide wingspan, the big radius, and the big box. I think that's why Austin Mack intrigues me so much this year, John, because Austin Mack has a 91 percentile in terms of his wingspan from wide receivers coming into the draft. And even though he's only 6'2", because of his wingspan at 91%, that says to me he can play big with a large radius. It gives me a lot of hope for him.
Well, he made some great sideline catches if you go back and you watch his film at Ohio State, but I think Benjamin Victor belongs in the conversation too, Paul, because
Understood.
He actually is more fitting into what you're saying. If you go back to Victor's touchdowns at Ohio State, every catch, for the majority of the time, was basically a jump ball and him just single-handedly beating out the corner or the safety. That was on him. And that, I would argue, would be an extremely beneficial target for Daniel Jones. Also, let's not dismiss the fact that, this goes back into how many games did Daniel Jones have his entire arsenal of personnel on the field simultaneously? That also impacts who his potential targets are and whether or not he has extra guys that are going to fight for him. And the answer is none. He didn't have all 5 of his guys on the field at the same time for one snap last season. That's going to change, hopefully, the dynamics of this offense as well. And, that, I think, has to be brought into the conversation.